Hello, everyone. So as we stated previously, there were 11 awardees for the Mobility on Demand Sandbox, and our project is called Bay Area Fair Value Commuting Demonstration. City of Palo Alto is the prime or the lead entity on this, and then I'm with Joint Venture Silicon Valley. We're a nonprofit. I'm the principal investigator. And our project has 31 partners from cities, vendors, employers, agencies, and nonprofits. And the ones in purple in the table there are going to undertake pilots with their own employees of the fair value commuting solution. For a CommuteCon audience, this is a background slide comparing auto-centered Silicon Valley versus transit-loving Helsinki. And of course, most of the U.S. is like Silicon Valley. So the first three rows are single-occupancy vehicle commute rate is half as much in Helsinki versus Silicon Valley. Transit rate is 12 times as much on commuting. Biking and walking is 4 times as much. And there's a number of other things like the density or the population per square mile that are advantageous to Helsinki, and new car fees and average commute distance that really lend themselves to shared mobility and transit solutions. It's more difficult in Silicon Valley. So I've circled Silicon Valley's 76% SOV rate, and I would say that we've never had a history in the auto-centered U.S. of ever really making a dent in a place that's got 76% SOV. So we've never shifted from 76% even down to 70%. So we don't really have evidence or a template of what to do. So our project is addressing that, but you should be skeptical about whether we can succeed or not. And I've also circled parking cost per hour and gas price to indicate that the price of driving in Silicon Valley is underpriced, so the prices are not fair, and we really need to address that and increase demand for the alternatives. And I wanted to contrast Silicon Valley to San Francisco, because San Francisco is really much more like Helsinki as well. So San Francisco is part of the Bay Area, but it's really different. So for commutes into downtown San Francisco, the SOV commute mode share is only 9%. And the next slide is also background. I think California and the Bay Area are somewhat unique in having a super interesting adopted policies to protect the climate and reduce traffic congestion. So it's a really big change vector that, if we succeed, could ripple far and wide in the U.S. So the goal is to hit 20% of emissions by 2040, increase adoption of electric vehicles dramatically. But in the table on the bottom, I think it's really interesting that there's 2 state policies and 2 adopted regional objectives to reduce per capita driving or vehicle miles traveled, VMT, by 15%. So we're talking about behavior change. And further, the objective is to double transit use and double biking use. So those are pretty aggressive objectives. And to achieve those, the evidence shows that we're going to need to change the pricing signals to travelers. And further as background, it's a heavy lift to impose increases in driving pricing to change commute behavior or to change any kind of driving behavior in the U.S. And further in California, there's Proposition 26, which was passed, which says that for most increases in fees or most new fees, a 2/3 supermajority vote is required by the legislature, and that is not currently achievable in California. So if we compare a table with 6 different driving pricing increases policies, I made the gas tax increase and charging $5 a day if you commute via SOV in red there. Those are sort of super effective policies, but they're not very reachable from politically. They have very low political viability scores. So the political viability scores column there is scored 1 to 5, where 5 would be super viable and 1 is unviable. So those 2 in red are great policies, but they're not very viable, and the 2 in yellow are also not very viable. And what we found from our research is enacting page drive auto insurance is somewhat politically viable and is worth pursuing. And also, what I'm going to go into the next slide, which is somewhat similar to what Stanford University does for their commute program with carrots and sticks, because sticks only are not very popular, but a combination of carrots and sticks is clearly going to be more popular than that. So with those 3 slides as background, so our very ambitious aspiration is to reduce single-occupancy vehicle commuting by 25%. And basically, we look at Stanford University's commute program, and we want to build on that. So use Stanford as a starting point. So the key thing is Stanford uses carrots and sticks to shift behavior. They succeeded over 10 years in shifting SOV from 75% to 50%. And essentially, if you take their parking permit rates and translate them into daily parking charges, it's roughly about $3 a day fee if you SOV commute. And then Stanford takes that revenue and they rebate it to people to bike and carpool and take transit. So if you have a fee on the bad thing, take that revenue and rebate it to the good thing. The short word for that is a fee bait. And that sort of scheme saved Stanford more than $100 million in construction of new parking structures. And so our aspiration with this project is to create what we envision as a next-generation software and policy solution that uses what Stanford has as a baseline and builds on top of it and makes it regionally scalable. And our solution for fair value commuting has 5 different components, and let me go through them from left to right. So on the left, we have enterprise commute trip reduction software such as Ride Amigos. And with that, some of the features of that is you automate as an employer running your commute program, and you want to have very accurate measurement of how your employees are commuting, so you get a daily dashboard of how your employees commuted. So that's a key thing, is we really want to instrument the commute with better data and really accurately know how people are commuting. And I should say the technology currently is such that employees self-report how they commuted every day, whether they drove or took transit or biked, and we envision over the next 24 months to automate that so that automatically your commute mode is detected and it essentially populates the employer's view of how the employees are commuting. And then second component is mobility aggregation smartphone applications, and I've got a slide coming up on that. So you can think of this as a single app that replaces your car. And the key thing is, from a software standpoint, we want the enterprise commute trip reduction software and the mobility aggregation software to communicate with each other via software, to have a little bit of integration. That is key. And then the third component is a similar to Stanford carrot and stick fee bait. The $3 per day SOV fee is rebated to non-SOV modes, and there is evidence in the U.S. from past history that shifts mode from 75% to 50%. By gap filling, what we mean are commuters sometimes have bad options depending upon where they are originating from, and we believe we can fill the gaps with new services such as Scoop peer-to-peer ride sharing, electric bikes for 8-mile commutes, electric scooters as first last mile to transit, and also great for, say, a 3-mile commute in, microtransit potentially for 20-mile commutes, and other new modes. So we think it's important to, I think there's reason for optimism to say that some of these new modes are really going to take off if we can shift the demand. So we think this overall 5-component solution is currently about 40% mature, so the features in the software are at a certain level and the policy is at a certain level, and our aspiration is to move this fair value commuting solution to 100% mature in the next 2 years. So I just want to finish up with some details specifically on the second component, the mobility aggregation app. Again, this is the app that's supposed to replace your car. So it's got a combination of public and private transportation options, mobility options. It weaves them together seamlessly. So on the right side, I've got a trip from Palo Alto to Sunnyvale, and it gives me a series of options and costs and greenhouse gas and time it takes to make such a trip. So the notion is multimodal trip planning and certainly solving use cases where you're taking 3 modes on your commute, give you a very customer-centered experience, and pay like Clipper, or have sophisticated electronic payment is a better way to say it for a national audience. So with that, I want to say thanks. Ready for questions?
Fantastic. Thank you, Steve. So 2 questions we have are, one is from Phil Kobernick from Alameda County, where he asks, how do you estimate the effectiveness of these programs? So how do you calculate that the carrot and stick approach yielded a 50% SOV reduction rate around that region? And the second question that was asked is by Ken Bowden from Denver Regional Council of Government, where he's curious about, how do low-income or underserved communities that are outside these urban centers access these transit options, and how do you reach them as well? And we have about 2 minutes, so please.
Okay. For Alameda, there is a 200-page white paper on this project, and so we went in the literature to look at the U.S. price elasticity of demand. There's a section in the white paper, Chapter 10C, that's got some more details on it. MTC's Ann Flemmer has a good quote we got from her that essentially say that if you have free parking in the Bay Area for your commute, it's 77% SOV. If you have to pay to park, it's 49% SOV. So sticks do change behavior in the Bay Area, and it's a matter of what the level of the sticks is. And then for social equity and low-income folks, this project is really targeted towards 9 to 5 commuters. So it's not a solution for people who are part-time necessarily, or with super small employers. It does score well on social equity because it is a net wealth transfer from high-income people to low-income people, which is a good thing. But in general, I think there's a lot of compassion we're seeing now from the regional agencies moving to something like Seattle's Orca Lift, where there's a low-income public transit subsidy for low-income people that qualify, which is a great thing, and we need to secure sustainable funding for programs like that and proliferate them around the U.S. So thank you.